Hey guys, it's M4J here and welcome back to the Majeffries Network here on OpenTTD. Now today we are working on the Realism initiative on the Great Western Line, or at least the majority of the Great Western Line, between Gardcity, St. Peter and Munfingford, Paragon. So the first thing we did, or the first thing I did, was rebuilt the depot down here at Cardtown. The whole step depot design that it was before, where as the line goes across diagonally there were two tracks going into the depot, I really don't like it. It doesn't work very effectively as a depot. Getting trains in and out of that is incredibly difficult. You can only really have two trains moving at any one time, whereas with the services that I'm planning on introducing on this line in the very near future, we're needing more capacity. So it's still, I think it's 10 tracks or 11 tracks, might be, no, I think it's an even number, it must be 10. But I'll count them. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, yeah, 10. It made it a lot easier to actually, hang on, I'm just looking to see what I'm doing now. Oh yeah, I'm removing signals. It made it a lot easier to build the depot to the new standards that I've been building depots in the past. One of the other great things about GSP is the lines were already pretty much in a straight line, so I was able to build the in and out lines on top of the existing infrastructure. So also using the bridges as kind of natural boundary, well, they're not natural, you know what I mean, man-made boundaries. I was able to put a series of crossovers in. It got a little bit complicated here because the track suddenly bends to the left to go past the depot. I think though overall the result is pretty good. I'm quite happy with it. I'm looking forward to seeing trains traverse it. You will see me a little bit later on in this episode bulldozed all of the bridges that you see there and extend them by a tile to the south so that I can add one more line in that comes in and out of the depot. More on that in just a bit when we get on to the next part of the episode. So the Great Western Main Line is now being built to RI standards, at least between Munfingford and GSP. There are some sections that I wish I could change still, particularly where the cross-country West Line branches off from the Great Western Line. I'm still really not happy with the way that looks. I've rebuilt it a little bit, and again you'll see that a bit later on in this episode. But overall, I think that junction needs a bit of an overhaul, which I'll probably do off camera just to rebuild it. I'm not looking forward to reassigning all of the orders for these trains. I think that is something that's going to be moderately painful at the minimum to be able to do. And in fact, one thing you see me doing here, which is also going to make it moderately painful, is I swap over the lines. So currently, or before today's episode, the fast lines ran on the inside of the slow lines, at least as far as, I want to say Trunfingley Market, but I think it was before that. What it ends up being now is the slow lines run on the southern side, the fast lines run on the northern side, and it just means going in and out of GSP, train movements should be slightly less complicated, and you'll see me build a couple of bridges back at GSP in just a second to make that easier as well. This is where the Kingston freight loop branches off from the Great Western Main Line. So you can see the way I'm actually building it here is currently the freight lines branch off and then go over all four lines, but in a second I change it so that the freight lines actually come off the center, run underneath the fast lines, and then rise up to join the loop proper, and the slow lines run on the outside of it. Again, it's about having as few conflicting movements as possible, even though the freight line was always going to be grade separated running off the Great Western Main Line. It didn't really make sense to have it branch off to the right and then bridge over all four lines when it could just branch through the middle and only run underneath the fast lines. You'll see here there was a tunnel in the way, and I couldn't figure out for quite a while actually where the tunnel was. Then I suddenly realised the orbital road that we built so long ago that I've never really used properly. A couple of novelty services that run on it, and that's about it. So we've lowered that tunnel, and actually with the new timetable automation button, I'm more inclined to start running more road vehicles now, because that's the reason I love this button so much. And in fact, Joker's got in touch with some more new features, which I'll share with you in just a second. But the reason I love that button so much is it really is now a case of you set up, you set up a timetable, and you set up a list of vehicles, So I'll always use my service spreadsheet to find out how many vehicles on the railway. On the road, I think it doesn't matter as much. And then you just press go. You press automate, control click automate, and then you press go, and it auto fills it in for you. And it doesn't just auto fill it in for you once and then it sticks to that timetable. It will be constantly changing, constantly evolving. So I imagine processing power is not great when that's happening, but if it means that the trains run more efficiently, I'm all for it. As far as I'm concerned, I think it's a brilliant idea. Here's where the switchover happens between the fast and slow. I knew it was on a curve somewhere, I just couldn't remember exactly where. You can see I'm just going back and amending the signalling. But yeah, with that automate button now, I can just build a bus line in the city and not have to wait for it to complete a circuit before I can send out the rest of the vehicles. I can just send them all out, and they won't get in each other's way, because eventually, as they start spreading out a bit more, the timetable will automatically adjust to suit that. So I can imagine, like, if I did it on the railway, for example, say it would normally take 100 ticks to go between two stations, but because there's a train in the way, it takes 500. Normally that'd be game over. I'd have to rerun the timetable and autofill, whereas now I can just press automate, and the next time it comes through, that train might no longer be in the way, and it only takes 100 ticks, and the whole rest of the timetable will automatically readjust to match that new time schedule. I think it's brilliant. And also the departures board that I showed you, I think it was last episode, might have been the episode before. Joker's actually got in touch and said that the board only updates when it's open. So I thought it was a constantly running thing in the background, a bit like cargo dist, but it's not, which is brilliant, because it means, again, processing power is kept to a minimum for something. I mean, really, the departure boards, it's a nice little knick-knack type thing. It doesn't really affect the inner structure of the game. It doesn't affect the gameplay that much, but it's nice to be able to just look at the departure board and go, this is the next train, it's going to Gardcity, St Thomas, that kind of thing. I think that's pretty cool. So it's good to know that it only affects the game when it's open. So if the game's running really slow, I just won't open the departure board, and it should speed things up again. The final thing that he got in touch about, there were a couple of other little things here and there, but the final thing, which is big, there's a new version of the game that he's currently working on. He didn't actually tell me when it was going to be released. I'm not going to pester him as to when it's going to be released, because, you know, it's released when it's released. But it involves channels, and if you don't know what channels are, it's a new part. It's not new, it's been around for quite a while actually, it's just not been in this particular patch. But it's an add-on to the game that allows you to build tunnels underwater at sea level. So in Gardcity, a long time ago now, I was moaning that I couldn't build tunnels on the metro network in the central circle, because the central circle is already at sea level. Which is why there are certain areas, particularly around GSP and also over towards GSJ, where the track has to come up a tile to then bridge over the water and then go back down a tile again. That's no longer the case. You can actually build tunnels, so even though the water is at the same level of the track, I think I've explained what this is before actually, but I'll explain it again. Essentially, the tunnel goes through the water in a gameplay sense. In a graphical sense, it goes through the water, but the gameplay sense, it goes under the water, along the bottom, and then back up again, just like the channel tunnel, just like all underwater tunnels. Big dive down, then it flattens out the bottom, and then rises up again. If anyone's driven through Dartford Tunnel in the UK, there's always that feeling of, just as it starts to level out at the bottom, you think, right, the Thames is right above me now. It's actually quite horrible. I don't like driving through underwater tunnels. On the train, I don't mind. Like on the Channel Tunnel, I was on a Eurostar once that stopped, and half of the lights went out on the train, and quite a few people were panicking, but I wasn't, and I don't know why, because it's the same thing. Particularly, well, actually, maybe not in this case, because the power lines would have been out, given the fact the lights went off. But if the water breaches through in a road tunnel, yeah, you're trapped in your car, but there's no... Like, if it only breaches in a little bit and then stops, you're fine, essentially. You might panic a little bit, you might end up with a phobia of water, but you're fine, predominantly. If that happens on a train, there's a lot of electricity flying around. 25,000 volts above your head. And then there's all the electrics in the train. I mean, there's electrics in cars as well, but cars are, and trains I suppose, are designed to act like Faraday cages. So all the electricity essentially goes around you. So if you're in a thunderstorm, the safest place to be is in your car, because lightning strike, Faraday cage. Anyway, enough of the science lessons. I don't like driving through underwater tunnels, but I don't mind going on a train through underwater tunnels. That's the main thing. So I'm really looking forward to rebuilding the metro tracks using the tunnels feature when that's introduced. And I think he said there were some other cool things as well that are coming. A lot of them are sort of little gameplay fixing type, behind the scenes type features. But I mean, they're all cool. I think the best features are the ones that you can't see, because they're the ones that really make the game tick. Oh, I'll talk about what's going on the screen again really quickly. So at this point here, I said it a while ago, where the Cross City line connects up with the Western Reaches line, the station didn't really work for me. So what I've done here is rebuilt the tracks, mainly because I was rebuilding the approach to Rinston Airport anyway, so I thought I might as well do this at the same time. So now the platforms are actually interchanging with a different station, so I do have to go through and change the orders. I can't remember if I did that or not. If not, I will go back and change that. But it's kind of the thing I said a few episodes ago about what George De Silva suggested about rebuilding stations and rebuilding platforms and adding additional platforms and taking some out and turning some stations into abandoned. That's definitely what's happening now. It's happening more and more on the network as I'm rebuilding things. It's mainly due to laziness, and I can kind of think this is the in-game version of what goes on in the real world, where it's just too much effort to remove the existing station or to move the existing lines, so I just leave them in situ. Drenninghead over on the Gardcity Great Eastern line, again I'm pointing, I don't know why I point, you can't see where I'm pointing. That's a very good example as well, because when I rebuilt those stations I left all the original track in place. I think I got rid of the station platforms themselves, but I kept the track and said I was going to reuse it for something. That's becoming less and less likely now, but it is a real sort of laziness as to why the tracks are still there. And that's going to happen all over the network. Eventually we'll have a whole network of its own made up of abandoned tracks and abandoned stations. They probably won't all be connected to one another, but they will exist, which I think's, you know, pretty cool. Now this bit here was probably the biggest upheaval of the entire project. At this point, again building the new waypoints in and out of Rinston, I basically had to adjust this curve, which doesn't sound like too disruptive. I had to demolish a lot of the city, but you know, I'm used to doing that. Where it became disruptive was because I got rid of the original track alignment. The bridges and the site of the depot on that overground depot didn't have to be so far away from the actual storage tracks anymore, which meant going through and redoing all of the orders on all of those trains. Now I only actually had to change 2 orders, which is fine, and then, you know, the game will reset the timetables, as I say, but it's still a bit of an upheaval. Also the fact that I had to move some trains that were in storage from one depot to the other on the centre rail line, but that's all done now, and that's all been built. And there are a couple of areas where I do change the track alignment a little bit to make the corners less intensive, because I do have a rule now on speed limits going around certain bends. If it's greater than, I think it's 10 tiles, then 125, 100 miles an hour, whatever it might be, is fine. But here's a good example. I think the corner here is too tight to be able to take it at 125 miles an hour. So I've actually added in these waypoints to make the train slow down a bit more. Which I think, you know, this is the Realism initiative after all. I think that's very realistic. It's one of these things actually, I always assumed, like particularly on the Great Western Main Line out of Paddington, I always assumed that as soon as you got out of London it was 125 miles an hour all the way, but it really isn't. Even like going into stations like Swindon and Slough and Reading, the speed limit can drop as low as 30 miles an hour, and these are HSTs and Class 800s. I always thought they, you know, swished into the station, but actually they go just as slow as if they were going into Paddington. The difference there, of course, being Paddington is a terminus. If you overrun it, you're in trouble. So the Realism initiative will end up slowing down the overall speed of these services, but the fact that it sometimes being slower actually increases efficiency, that's not necessarily a bad thing. So I'm looking forward to getting all of the trains out on the line again and running. And this is the section I was talking about. So we've got, I think it's Gronville East and West. One's on the Great Western Line, one's on the Cross Country West Line, and then the junctions that connect them all up. We've also got, I think it's Sudwood or Sondwood North on the Great Western Line, sort of sandwiched in the middle of that triangular junction as well. So because the junctions onto the Cross Country Line I've now set as being 30 to 45 miles per hour depending on which line you're on, I also decided that I would slow down the trains on the corner leading up to that. Now most slow trains stop at Gronwell East, so I didn't have to change that too much, but the ones that don't, so for example on the fast line, I had to add in additional waypoints. We also had the issue of the cross-country Voyagers, currently run on the slow lines between Woolworth and Gronville West, because that's where the junction is. So I've actually built a junction now on the fast lines. It's not the nicest junction in the world, it's actually a bit slapdash, it's a single track junction, but it means that they can use the fast lines between Woolworth and Gronville East now, which again increases capacity on the slow lines for more services, which I will be adding. I haven't done it so much in this episode, but in later episodes on the RI you will notice that I've rebuilt platforms to have some terminating platforms that are technically through platforms. That's because now that I've built Bar City Central, which I still haven't renamed, I need to do that. Now that I've built that and tested the idea of using signals with orders depending on whether you're entering from the back or the front, and the fact that trains are now successfully reversing when they're supposed to, I can go back across the network and start creating through platforms out of bay platforms in the middle of stations. So I can have additional capacity on the through lines by doing that. It also means that I can have trains terminate at stations where they wouldn't have been able to in the past. So for example, Munfingford Falls, it's currently built so that it's only got bay platforms on the eastern edge, on the Western Reaches line, but actually I kind of want to reintroduce the service that used to run between GSP and Munfingford Falls via the Great Western Main Line, and then just before Plindon it would branch off. I want to reintroduce that. I think one way I'll actually do it is have it run into Plindon and then reverse up towards Munfingford Falls, up the I forgot what the bloody line's called now, the West Coast Line, whatever name I gave that, I can't remember now. Just to make that run a bit more efficiently. I've also added lots of waypoints here at Sannington, mainly because there are diverging lines and they do a little less bend, so in theory that's a junction, therefore should be at a slower speed. The one into Sannington from the western edge I haven't adjusted, because the idea is it's just going to be a slightly wider curve where it branches off, and slightly wider curve technically means you can run faster on it. But on the eastern edge, where the lines split, there's kind of an S-bend that goes onto the line towards Fort Flonwood, so I've redesigned the station with waypoints to make that a little bit easier. Besides that, added some extra waypoints here at Munfingford, which I'm tempted to rename, because I don't think Munfingford is actually the nearest town to the station. And there's also the fact that I was supposed to have built connecting bus services to the nearest towns, which I haven't done, but now, again, with the automate button, I feel more inclined to actually go back and do that. That's pretty much it for this episode, though. You can just, I mean, you could tell by looking at the timer that we're nearly at the end. I'm looking at the on-screen preview and seeing that we're nearly at the end. Overall, I'm pretty happy with GSP. There are some things that I would change still, like that junction, which I said I'll probably go back and fix that off camera. Next time, we are doing the lines out of GSJ, which does make things a little bit more complicated, but I'll talk to you a bit more about that next time. So until then, guys, thanks very much for watching. Don't forget to leave a like if you enjoyed the video, and of course enjoying the series. Drop some comments down below with ideas for future episodes. If you haven't already subscribed to the channel, be sure to click the subscribe button. If you have already subscribed to the channel, thank you guys for your continued support. And until next time, I will see you soon.